everyone. Thanks for having me. As Diane mentioned, I did grow up on a farm and I did work at a turkey farm. I started out as an egg girl in the egg house and then was later promoted to to be a barn girl, which I don't know if it was a promotion, but I loved it and I stayed there for almost 10 years as I finished up school. Um, so I guess it's interesting. I like the agenda change is good, fitting. I'm going to be talking about mental health and stress. So I feel stressed right now a little bit. So uh, we're going to talk about what we do at AgKnow. So my talk today is about farm mental health and some of the work that we're doing at AgKnow. And this is the Alberta Farm Mental Health Initiative. And what I'm going to be talking today is specifically, I'll introduce who we are, what we do, and it's going to be an overview of some of the things that we do at AgKnow. So I'm going to present some of our brand new research, some of our bits on depression, anxiety, coping strategies, and it's going to be pretty interactive. So I'm not going to be up here talking the whole time. There'll be some Slido, but there's also on the table, you'll notice that there is a piece of paper that has the AgKnow letterhead on it. And that's for, I kind of put my professor hat on and we're going to do some discussion to get you engaged and to get your feedback. So what is AgKnow? So we formed officially in 2022. And since then, it's been quite busy. Our team is growing, but our mission is to destigmatize mental health and promote resilience among farmers and farm families across Alberta so that they can lead fulfilling and productive lives. We know that we can't eliminate the stressors of farming, but there are things that we can do to help farmers and their families cope with these stressors. And our vision is really to shift the culture of farming so that mental health just becomes something that you do, right? And that we believe that mental health is health. So it really should be enveloped into that. So here's our core team. We are small, but we're quite mighty. So our program director is Linda Hunt, who many of you might know. So she has 20 years experience as a forage and livestock agrologist, and she's also has a lot of experience working in policy and in government and in programming. And then Ellen Hall is the executive director of ARICA, the Agriculture Extension and Research Council of Alberta. And he comes with about 35 years of experience working in different areas in agriculture, government, and different programs and initiatives in agriculture. And then there's me. So I'm the lead researcher, and me working on agriculture research is actually relatively new. So I have the background in farming and I am an applied social psychologist, which means I work with community groups, develop programs and courses and to facilitate change. But it wasn't until I met Linda and she was looking for a researcher, and I kind of scoured the post-secondary schools in Alberta and I couldn't find anyone. And then I kind of clicked like, why don't I do this? And so it's been a really natural pairing, and it's a wonderful thing to realize that your life has purpose. So I've kind of have found my calling here. So right now I was talking with Brenda, we're engaged in a variety of studies right now. So I'm going to talk about some of those findings, but first let's do something engaging. I'm going to start by telling a story, and this is a real story. So I have a colleague at the Edmonton campus, and I was there in her office last week. And she has this exact print on her office wall. And while I was there, she had to step out of her office for a moment. And I got up, and maybe it's because I'm from a rural area and a psychologist, I got up and I kind of inspected this more closely. And she came back into the room. I was still standing there, and she said something like, I just love the country life. Doesn't it make you just want to pack up your stuff and like move to the country? And so my question to you is, looking at this picture, imagine that you knew nothing about living in, farming or rural life. How has this artist depicted farm life? How have they depicted rural living? So that's our first Slido question. I'd like you to type out, using Slido, type out whatever words come to mind. And we have a word cloud, which means that the most common words will be sort of shown larger. So idyllic, relaxing, paradise. What else do we have? I see woke, utopia, right? Peaceful, right? Beautiful, right? It is. It really is. But does that reflect farm life? Right? Maybe not. Now, and whether it's pictures like this, or it's commercials, or TV shows, or news reporting, farming is often depicted as these rolling rural landscapes, or men working outdoors, tending to livestock and growing our food, sunny skies, bountiful crops, all that. And like from my friend's perspective, and the life of a Canadian farmer looks pretty great, right? But if you scratch the surface of that just a bit, you'll notice, like, you'll realize that a farmer's life is really challenging. It's quite different. In fact, this is the painting that I have on my office wall. And even though it's about it's a print, not the actual painting, but even though this print is from a painting that was painted about 150 years ago, there's something more realistic about it, right? It shows that sort of the grittiness of farm life, and the fact that everyone pitched in. There was a sense of community. Men and women contributed, and it was hard work, right? And you pitched in because if you didn't do it, no one else was going to do it. So why does this matter? Well, to understand mental health in farming, we really have to understand the nature of the business. And we know that, but not everyone knows that. So according to some recent statistics, so farms across the country contributed to the Canadian economy in a big way, right? $87 billion. And of the provinces, which province contributed most to this? It was Alberta. Alberta contributed most to this overall contribution, okay, about 25%. And why does that matter? Our farms are large, right? There's a lot at stake, right? There's a lot of time and money invested in someone's business. And then who are the farmers, right? Just like any occupation or any industry, the demographic shift. So, consistent with that first picture I showed you of the rolling landscapes and the man working, and then this nursery rhyme like Old MacDonald, like the majority of producers are still white men, right? Across the country. In fact, about almost 70% of producers are men. However, this number is steadily decreasing. And at the same time, the average age of a farmer is increasing. And maybe in 10 years' time, this Old MacDonald image won't be too unrealistic. But so who are replacing the men? Right? What are these demographic shifts that are happening? So some of these shifts is that, like any industry, yeah, there are shifts, but women are entering the industry at an increasing rate. So according to the recent census data that was released last year, right, and the last census was in 2016, there are more women who are producers in Canada. And Alberta had one of the largest increases. Over 1,000 women are now like female operators of farms. And why do these demographics matter? They matter for a variety of reasons. First, for representation, right? So, and chances are is that these demographic shifts aren't going to change, right? Chances are is that there might be a continual increase of women producers. But also, and despite being active producers in agriculture, there are some groups, including women, who have been sort of historically excluded from representation on boards. And when that happens, it can render those individuals to feel that their voice is invisible or that they don't matter. So one of the things that we do, say at AgKnow, is ensure that everyone who contributes to farming is recognized, and that we look at not just, say, the majority's needs, but what are all of the other individuals who are contributing to farming and what are their needs? Because that really is going to contribute to sustainable farming in the long term. So my first discussion question that I want you to do as a group at your table. So if one of you could grab that piece of paper and assign yourself as like the group's recorder, that would be great. But my question is, why does mental health matter on a farm? I want you to take a couple of minutes and discuss with your group. Why does mental health matter on a farm? And write down a couple of points. Okay. All right. So finish up your discussions. Excellent. Okay. So this is just like I would do with my class. All right. So I'm interested to hear at least a couple of comments, maybe one from a comment from a couple of tables. Those who avoid eye contact are most likely to be chosen. Why does mental health matter on the farm? Any ideas? Yeah. Right. So if you didn't hear that, right, there's a lot, the farm operator has to do all the decision making. So it's on you, right? There's a lot of pressure, right? So if you don't have good mental health or you're stressed, and we'll talk about what that looks like, right? That can really impede whether or not you even want to make a decision. Yeah, absolutely. There are so many unknowns. Like unlike any industry, farming and forestry is one of the most stressful occupations, right? That is supported by data. And it's stressful because there are so many unknowns, so many things that are outside of your control. So if you're able to develop some resiliency tools, that's going to help you, be a good or better decision maker and to recognize the signs of stress. We also know research shows that um, when mental health matters because when mental health is poor on a farm, that's when accidents and injuries can happen. And I want you to consider this example. So, any machine and farm equipment or not, it's not going to last if we run it at maximum performance, is it? So, um, even if the machine looks pretty good on the outside, it's going to have problems and it probably will break down if you keep overrunning it and you never give it a rest. So if we wouldn't do that to our farm equipment, why would we do that to ourselves sometimes? Okay, and when we think about mental health, it's many people might think that it's just being sad, but it's much more than that. So we're going to talk about some of the stressors. So this is another Slido. So I would like you to answer this question. As farmers or poultry producers, what are some of the most common stressors that you face? And it can be a range of things. You can put down more than one answer. It'll again pop up as a word cloud. Okay, so we're getting some responses come in, right? So number one, disease, or like AI. Okay, the weather, again, that unpredictable, even AI, somewhat unpredictable. You can sometimes put in all the protocols and safety measures in place and your farm still might get it. Feed costs, debt, lack of production, lack of labor, money, right? So I'm seeing some common themes here, right? Everyone can probably relate to this in some way. And this isn't, so your stresses, even though some commodities might have specific stressors, right? In general, there's a lot of commonalities. Right. Check quality. Excellent. So I'll wait for Diane to take the picture there before I move on. So what are the stressors of the farm? So FCC a few years ago conducted some research and they identified like this list of stressors, right? So some of what you identified is listed here, but again, depending on the commodity, it might be quite different. So that's one of the things we want to do too at AgKnow is actually identify for each industry, what are those stressors and what are those specific needs that you have tailored resources and not just some sort of blanket approach. Our own research actually wanted to identify like what is the relative importance of these. So instead of just presenting a laundry list of stressors, which ones are more stressful? Right. So this is some of our new data, and it's ranked in sort of order here, and it's dealing with bad weather was number one. Time pressure, right? Feeling that you have just so much to do and no time to do it. Lack of manpower or good manpower or manpower when you need it. Equipment breakdowns, of course, that's going to happen and at the worst times. And then planning for retirement, right? I saw someone just give like exactly, right? We might think retire. We don't have time to think about retirement right now, right? Because we have all these other stresses that we have to deal with. But you might wonder, like, isn't stress just part of the job? And if you follow Twitter, a few years ago, there was a meme about like chicken shaming, and everyone would write down like what were some of the things their chickens did. This was my favorite because this is my experience. I would always have hens that laid eggs in like the oddest places. But isn't stress good sometimes? When does it become a problem? So stress can be good. However, and it can motivate us. However, I'm going to share a quick case study with you. And this is Sean's story. So in Sean's case, he's a farmer in Alberta. And he said that the stress he was facing was slowly building up. And what he said, he had, all this time, the crops were poor, money was tight, and he had taken on a second job to really make ends meet. And he describes a lot of pressure that he was facing at the time. And adding to that pressure was the fact that he was also a volunteer firefighter, and he had to go to a call where there was a fatality, and it was someone that they knew in the community. What happened was that this pressure just became it became too much. And in his words, he had a mental breakdown, right? He had an anxiety attack. And he ended up seeking some mental help that really helped him cope with this and gave him some of the tools that he needed. And what's important there is, just like Sean and many of us, we might think that our anxiety might go away, right? It generally doesn't. It can get worse. And our own research has shown this. So this is our new research that's like just coming in now. We're still collecting data, but I wanted to share with you what we have, because there's no research on mental health of Albertan farmers. The national study that was done in 2015 by the University of Guelph included less than 100 Albertans, right? So we want to try to improve that. So we're actually replicating that study here. And right now I have over 400 farmers. So what we found, though, so far is that about 34% of farmers reported experiencing depression. 45 reported moderate to severe anxiety. And then 45 experienced like chronic high stress. So I'm going to focus on those in a bit more detail now. And we're going to start with anxiety. So again, drawing from Sean's story. So, feeling worried and nervous is a very normal part of life. It helps us, being nervous helps us pay attention, focus. It gets like a fire under our butts to get things done. But when does anxiety become problematic? So if anxiety becomes too severe, we'll feel helpless. We'll feel confused. Some of what we are afraid of seems out of proportion with what the actual event is. And what are some of the signs you might notice? So if someone's highly anxious, they might have trouble making decisions. They might procrastinate. They might lash out. They might be impatient. They could develop phobias. It could also show itself as like being like highly vigilant. And I see this among poultry producers around, say, springtime, or when AI might be high, right? They're hyper vigilant because they're nervous of what might happen. Women are twice as likely to experience anxiety than men. However, that could be because women report it and men tend to hide those symptoms. Depression. So our data shows, yes, and it's consistent with the national data, that depression is common among farmers and among the general population too. Depression is a common illness. It affects young and old, men, women, people of different ethnicities, all professions. And it's an illness that can be diagnosed by a doctor or psychologist or a psychiatrist. And what it involves, it's when a person kind of, it's more than feeling sad. It's where they lose interest in some of those activities or loves that they used to really enjoy. They tend to withdraw from others, right? So they might decline, say, social events that they used to always enjoy going to, and they might, feel really fatigued. It can also show, like, when someone is experiencing more severe types of depression, it might show itself as saying hopelessness, about hopelessness about the future, and they may even think about, say, suicide. It's not just a mental disease or illness, but it's also physical, right? So it can show itself as fatigue, stomach aches, and headaches. And now, depression, you might think, well, it's so common, why wouldn't I see it more? People do a really good job of hiding it, right? So among mental illness or mental health issues in general are still highly stigmatized. So people will conceal it. But just like anxiety, it's not something that typically goes away on its own, and it might have sort of ebbs and flows. So what does depression maybe look like on a farm? Okay, so take a look at this picture for a moment. Some people might be like, this looks okay. Right. And this would look okay. For example, like this is a picture of someone who was suffering from depression. And it's not that this looks right. Sometimes, like, I think our property looked like that sometimes, but it didn't stay like that. Right. And that's kind of the difference, right? When you notice a change in a person's behavior, so it can be that depression might manifest itself in, an increase in illness, their appearance declines from what's normal, right? Maybe they have a really tidy homestead, but now you're noticing, or farmstead, and now you're noticing there's a lot of debris and things that are unkept. Those are some warning signs that maybe something's not right. And then burnout. Burnout is probably one of the most common syndromes among farmers. And it's no surprise. And we hear about burnout all the time. And when you think about burnout, it might seem like it's, someone who feels completely exhausted, rubs their temples and deep sighs. But there are three components of burnout. It's feeling exhausted, like you are just completely overextended, you're depleted emotionally, and you feel physically tired, right? But you keep going, right? Because that's the job, right? You also might feel very cynical, right? So you just, you feel really disengaged from the industry and maybe the people in it or the government. And then you also feel like you're just not doing a great job, right? Even though you might be producing, you just don't feel like you're being successful in your job. And this is one of the most common syndromes that we see among farmers. And so this leads us to a second case study. This was Dwayne. And Dwayne, he's another farmer in Alberta. And his story is that, he had so many balls in the air, right? He had cattle. He cropped over, 2,000 acres. He was doing a lot, and he was also engaged socially with his community. And what he says, in like a lot of ways, well, he started to see cracks, in his words, in his marriage, and then began to find farming to be a burden rather than that joy that it used to be. And he says, like, in a lot of ways, farmers are gamblers, because so much of farming is out of their hands. So I heard that from a comment earlier here about things that lack of control. And he says, looking back, I spread myself too thin. Again, speaking to like the stressors, right? Not maybe enough manpower, that time pressure. So essentially these feelings for him kind of deepened. And that's the interesting thing about burnout is that it can happen quite gradually. And because it happens gradually, we don't notice it, right? It's not like you're hit with all of these like sudden, tasks that you have to do, but it's something that is gradual, and we become accustomed to it until we just can't cope with it anymore. And that's what happened with Dwayne. He actually had to go seek help. And he describes that this was this life-changing experience when he got some mental health help. When I read his story, I recognized how it was a great example of burnout, right? He felt overwhelmed. He felt like he had nowhere to go. He felt stuck in the situation, and he saw farming as a burden rather than a joy. And it's okay, but sometimes we feel like that. I feel like I'm a parent. Sometimes I feel like that as a mom, right? But it's when these feelings essentially, if they continue or you don't get help, right? This is where it become problematic. They won't go away on their own. So this is another activity I want you to do. So I'm mad we've been talking about stress and some of the very common conditions that someone might have. What could you do if you're talking to, say, a fellow farmer? What could you say to them in that moment when they're stressed out that helps? And alternatively, what should you avoid saying? So question number 2 on your piece of paper, I want you to take some time and think about like kind of the do's and don'ts of like what's helpful to say to someone when they're stressed and what's not. I'll give you about 2 minutes to work on this. Okay, about another 30 seconds. Okay, finish up what you're writing. So I'm going to get some feedback from a couple of tables. I'll repeat back so that those online can hear your good comments. But what is something that you could say to someone? What could you say or do that could help them in that moment when they're stressed out? Yeah. All right. So I'm sorry that you're feeling this way. You're not alone, right? You're validating like their emotions, right? You're letting them talk. Anything else? Take a day off and take a deep breath. We'll talk about spend time with family. We're going to talk about coping. Yeah, what that is and what that can, how you can translate. My favorite is like do some yoga and right. So how does that, how do you translate those ideas to farm life? What about what doesn't help? Oh yes, go ahead here. Right. Take it one day at a time. There's so many uncontrollables, right? So thinking actually too far ahead in the future isn't going to help, right? You can't forecast the future. You can't forecast the weather. You can only manage really what's in your control. Right? That's a great comment. Yeah. Let's go for a beer, right? One beer, right? Right. That's okay. It's because you know what? Those indirect forms of social support go a long way. Now, what about what doesn't help? You probably have a longer list. Let's go for a beer. Suck it up, right? And that's indicative of farm culture, isn't it? Right? Put some dirt on it. Keep going. Pull yourself up by your bootstraps. I saw a hand over here. What's that? Okay. Yes. All of the above. Yes. So if you didn't hear that, it's like, it's fine, right? You'll get over it. You know, it'll pass. Not helpful, right? Like, not helpful. Yes. Comparing, right? Like, oh, it could be worse, or at least you're doing better than that person. They don't care about that person. They care about themselves at that moment, right? All right. So this is again something that we can all relate to. Now there are some things that we work with producers and we try to come up with like we have a network of therapists who have actually helped us develop what are some things that you could say to a farmer who is stressful. And one thing that you'll notice is that a lot of these comments or help advice tips they're all questions, right? They encourage dialogue. But one thing is also to let them talk, don't interrupt. And oftentimes, say for a farmer who isn't used to maybe expressing emotions, it might come out just as like verbal diarrhea, and that's okay, right? So really resist interrupting them and let them talk. But it can, you know, I hear what you're saying, so repeat back, make sure that there's, you know, it's clear, and that also helps them reflect back. You know, it sounds like you have a lot to manage, but like, how are you dealing with that? Right. So asking them like how help them problem solve this. And also reflecting back, like remind them, like, you know what, have you ever encountered something challenging in the past? And how did you get past that? So you remind them of like that they are resilient, right? They do have these tools and they can draw on their own strength and that they can sort of get past this. So it's not the same as like this will pass, but like again, reminding them of like the tools that they have and they can use. but it's the active listening, empathy, and not just empathy like this is hard, right? They know it's hard, right? But give them something, right? Always respond with a question if you're able to get the conversation rolling. And then what are some, some resources that are available? And this is my last discussion question here is, what are the things that farmers do to cope? So I heard the one like have a beer, not have a beer, but what are some things that you can do on or off the farm that really helps you cope with that stress? Take a couple of minutes with your group and write down some things that help you unwind, help you cope with stress. Okay. All right. The conversation kind of quieted. That's usually when I know that people are done. Okay. So finish up what you're discussing. All right. What are some things that you can do on, let's say on the farm? What are some things that you can do on the farm? We can't always, like leave the farm, but what are some things that you can do that work for farmers to help you unwind? Yeah. Family time? Right. Fishing. I love fishing. I'm not good at it, but I like it. Yep. That's what you're going to say? What else could you do? Yeah. Campfires? Right. Starting a campfire when we're able to. All right. What about off the farm? What are some things that you do off the farm to unwind? And it is good to go off the farm to really like physically remove yourself from the space and get some perspective. But what are the things that you can do? Yeah. Fishing and golfing. So I'm hearing a lot of like recreation. That's great. Go to a meeting for a day, right? You're right. You're with your similar others. You're networking, right? You're building connections. You're learning about stuff like this from people like me. All right. So some of the common coping strategies, and we're interested in understanding what are some of the ways that farmers can cope, because you can't, some of the traditional methods, right? Meditation or yoga, those are great. But I have yet to see a farmer break out, get out of the tractor and do some yoga moves. But on the farm, it can be things like some of those, say, like mindless tasks. Like I love washing my equipment with my power washer. That is my thing. Or checking fences and maybe instead of taking the truck, I might walk with my dog. And it can be sometimes even just going a little bit slower in the truck, right? Taking that a little bit of time actually shows that it's beneficial. Okay. Off the farm, it can be participating in, say, volunteer or mini league games, going to auctions, right? One of my favorite things to do, and one of the places I probably meet most of farmers. And then you spend all your money. And then what's actually called social snacking. So the Red Cross is actually recommending doctors to prescribe what's called social snacking, because they value that there is value in social connecting. So just like what you're doing today, networking when talking with other people. So hanging out or going to coffee shops can be good for building a sense of community and maybe learning from similar others, because it's good to reach out to others and talk. However, one thing that like a social group, like a coffee group can't do, they probably don't have that level of skill to give you some of the tools you might need. Right. So that comes from maybe someone with that background in psychology and also someone who might understand farming. So one of the things that we have at AgKnow is we have a therapist network. So last year we put out a call for all therapists, so counselors, psychologists, etc., who have background in agriculture. Maybe they're farmers themselves. And right now on our website, we have 12 individuals. They're across Alberta, and they have on our website, you can look at their profiles, maybe choose one that maybe like seems like a good fit for you. But we did that to help streamline that process so that an individual can like have kind of develop a relationship maybe faster. And so if you go on our website, you can look at the therapist, choose one. You can connect with them. They offer like a free 15-minute sort of a meeting if you want to just kind of connect with them, see if there's like a fit. One of the things, and then talk about it. You schedule a meeting with them. One of the things that we're working on to continue is our free therapy sessions, right? So we're hoping that that'll be something later in the summer and ongoing, where farmers or their farm family members can get free counseling sessions for up to 2 or so sessions. And then we have other mental health resources that we're developing on our website, and also workshops and talks and presentations from people like me who go out to communities, but we're networking with the communities themselves to build resiliency in those communities. So if you want to get involved, how would you do that? There's lots of ways. And I'm a researcher, so me and like contribute to this voice. We are an evidence-based, initiative, right? Everything that we do is, we don't speak for farmers. We gather feedback from farmers, and that informs all of our resources. That's what kind of informs our push for policy change. So if you really want to help your industry, contribute on things like this. So right now we have our farm stress coping and resilience survey that's active. And then these are all on our AgKnow website also. And then the other study that's relevant for this group is I'm conducting a study on farm animal epidemics and depopulation. I've collected data already from people who have had their farms depopulated, but if you're interested, it would be a conversation with me. It's totally private, confidential. I don't share your name with anyone, but all of your feedback is essentially pooled, and it's helped to help inform changes for farmers in Alberta. So if you're interested about that, come chat with me if you want. We can set up a time. And if you want more information about AgKnow, or you want to talk with me or Linda, or schedule an event, or have someone in your community who wants to be engaged, you can come see me. But thank you for taking part today.
Thanks, Rebecca, for all those helpful information pieces, and then also getting us involved. And that's important as well. I could hear the buzz in the room that people are talking. And I think that's been a real bonus of us recognizing the importance of mental health. Now, we do have Slido, and you noticed you were active on the polls, and just to the left of the polls at the top, there's Q&A. So if you have questions, you can type them in there, and then we can ask them of our speakers. So we did have a couple of questions come in, and I think I've got time for a couple here. One of them, a couple of them kind of relate to how do our Alberta stats compare to the rest of the population? And then one, how do the Alberta stats compare to the national study? Kind of give us some perspective on where Alberta's at nationally, and then compared to non-farmers, I guess.
That's a good question. That's a great question. So how do our results compare to what's reported nationally? There's as many similarities as there are differences. In terms of depression, anxiety, burnout, it's pretty similar. However, our stress levels in Alberta are higher than they are reported in the national sample. And also the other thing that's really interesting about this is the concept of rurality. So what is rural living? When I lived in Ontario, I could get in my car, or it was a truck, and I could drive to Walmart in 30 minutes, right? That's not my reality in Alberta, right? It might take me, depending on where I am, it could be a couple of hours, right? So that idea of what is rural living is really different. So right now, a lot of the mental health programs are coming out of a team in Ontario. And that was really important. So I'm working now with that team so that Alberta has a literal voice at the table, because our context is quite different. So we want to ensure that any of the tools and resources that are coming this way make sense for our farmers. And that's why this data is so important. So there are a lot of differences, and we also have a much larger sample of women who contributed to the survey, which is not represented at all in the national sample, and they didn't analyze the data by commodity groups, and we can do that. So we're actually finding that, for example, poultry producers have higher levels of anxiety than some of the other producers, right? So that's meaningful information for us so that we can target some change in resources.
Okay, and one other question: are you finding more or women are becoming more prominent in farming because men are working off the farm?
I don't know. Okay. Um, it could be that, well, women have always been part of agriculture. They just haven't been, they just have kind of been in the periphery for a long time. And it might be that there's maybe spaces opening up. There's been a lot of change, just like social changes, which have made some space for now women to be farm operators or maybe take over family farms. So, but we don't necessarily know the reason. What That's actually one of our studies right now, is investigating new farmers, right? What are the motivations? You know, why do you want to enter this industry if you have a farming background or not, given that it's so stressful? So that's something that that we'll really be able to answer probably in the next year.
Great. Okay. Well, thank you very much. Let's put our hands together again for Dr. Rebecca Purc-Stephenson.